A woman in her 60s sits down in a professional makeup chair looking tired. 40 minutes later, she stands up looking rested, with no injections involved. The products on the artist's table are the same brands stocked at any pharmacy counter. What changed her face was not the formula. It was the direction every stroke traveled. Artists who prepare mature faces for high-definition cameras follow one rule that appears on no packaging. Every line, every shadow, and every point of light must angle up toward the temples. And the technique taught at beauty counters for decades points everything down. How can identical products read 10 years apart on the same face, in the same bathroom light? The answer starts with what aging actually does to the architecture of a face, and with how the human eye reads one. Dermatologists describe facial aging as a slow downward migration. Collagen production drops through the 40s and 50s, so skin loses its scaffolding. The fat pads that once sat high on the cheekbones deflate and drift toward the jaw. The ligaments holding everything in place gradually loosen. None of this is a flaw in any individual face. It is the same sequence on every face, only on different schedules. The visible result is a new set of shadows that all point one way, down. The fold from nose to mouth deepens. The outer corners of the eyes and lips turn slightly downward. A soft shadow settles along the jawline where the cheek used to be. Now the second half of the mechanism. The human eye does not measure a face the way a ruler would. It reads a face as a pattern of light and shadow, and it does so in a fraction of a second. Wherever light sits, the eye perceives firmness and projection. Wherever shadow sits, the eye perceives depth and descent, which means every product placed on skin becomes information the eye will read. Every stroke of blush, every line of pencil, every patch of shadow either repeats the downward map that age has drawn, or redraws that map on an upward angle. Makeup artists who work with women over 45 build entire routines on that single idea, and beauty editors who cover mature skin keep circling back to it as well. But the techniques taught to today's 60-year-olds when they were 25, blush on the apples, liner all the way around the eye, matte powder over everything, were designed for faces with full fat pads and oil to spare. On a face at 55, those same habits trace the descent line by line. What follows are 10 placements that reverse it. Each one comes with the old promise, the mechanism underneath it, what that mechanism does across a real day of wear, and the corrected version. The first placement does the most visible lifting in the least time, and it involves the product almost everyone positions too low. Trick number 1, blush, swept on a diagonal toward the temples. The promise printed on blush compacts since the 1980s is a youthful flush placed on the apples of the cheeks, the round part that rises with a smile. That advice was built for young faces, where the apple and the cheek's highest point are the same place. But on a face past 45, the fat pad that formed that apple has deflated and slid lower. Smiling still lifts the muscle, and the moment the smile relaxes, the color settles onto the lower cheek. Round color, placed low, does two things at once. It widens the middle of the face, and it drags the eye down toward the mouth. The formula compounds the placement. Powder blushes are built on talc and mica, absorbent minerals that grip oil to stay put. Skin past menopause produces far less oil, so there is little for the powder to hold on to. Within an hour, the pigment starts sitting on top of dry texture instead of melting into it. By midday, the circle of color has gone patchy at its lower edge, exactly where the eye is already reading descent. The corrected placement treats blush as a lifted diagonal rather than a circle. Start at the outer cheekbone, roughly level with the bottom of the nose, and sweep the color up along the bone toward the top of the ear. The finished shape should resemble a soft check mark aimed at the temple, with nothing sitting below the line of the nostrils, and use a cream formula. Creams are built on emollients, flexible oils, and waxes that move when the face moves, so the color bends with every smile instead of cracking against it. Makeup artists working backstage at fashion shows use this diagonal on models of every age. On a mature face, it changes where the cheek appears to sit within one pass of the fingers. Directly beneath that diagonal sits the placement that gives it a floor. Trick number 2. Cream contour under the cheekbone, blended upward. Contour promises sculpture. The technique came out of stage and photography work, where a dark stripe under the cheekbone carves definition that flat lighting erases, and social media turned it into a daily step. On young skin, a matte contour powder dragged from the ear toward the corner of the mouth can photograph as bone structure. But that downward stripe lands on a mature face in the same territory as the jowl shadow and the fold beside the mouth. The eye adds the painted shadow to the real ones and reports a heavier, lower face. And there is a second problem hiding in the pan. Powder contours rely on iron oxides for their brown tone, and iron oxides oxidize on contact with skin and air, shifting warmer as the hours pass. A shade that read as neutral shadow at 8 in the morning can read orange-brown by 3 in the afternoon, which stops looking like structure and starts looking like a mark. The corrected version changes the product, the position, and the blend. Use a cream contour stick for the same flexibility reason as the blush. Place it only under the back 2/3 of the cheekbone, starting near the top of the ear, stopping well before the front of the face. Then blend only the upper edge, pulling the color up into the blush diagonal so the shadow dissolves toward the temple. The lower edge stays soft but stays put. A shadow that fades upward tells the eye the cheek above is casting it, which is exactly what a high, firm cheek does. Reviewers over 40 who test cream contours keep reporting the same detail, that the difference shows most at the end of the day, when a powder has gone warm and a cream still reads as shadow. Creams keep replacing powders in these corrections. The reason has a name, and it arrives with the final trick. Follow the upper edge of that shadow as it fades and the eye lands where the cheekbone meets the temple, a few millimeters below the tail of the brow. Trick number 3, raised brow tails. The standard instruction is to follow the brow's natural line. It sounds respectful of the face, and for decades it was safe advice. But the natural line changes. Dermatologists point out that the bone around the eye socket slowly remodels with age, while the outer brow loses both hair and support, so the tail thins and drifts downward. Following the natural line now means carefully drawing a descending stroke at the exact outer corner where lift matters most. Every squint and every raised eyebrow makes that downward tail the most active line on the upper face. The corrected tail ends slightly higher than where the hair actually falls. Take a fine brow pencil and build the tail in short, upward strokes, hair by hair, letting it rest a touch above its natural position and stopping it a little shorter than the old length, because a long tail inevitably chases the droop. Then brush everything up and out with a tinted brow gel, so the hairs themselves hold an upward direction all day instead of flattening by lunchtime. The change is measured in millimeters, and the effect is not small. Beauty editors who cover makeup for older readers describe the raised tail as the adjustment their readers notice fastest in photographs, because the brow is the frame the entire eye area hangs from. A few millimeters below that raised tail sits the line that argues with it most often. Trick number 4, a wing aimed at the end of the brow. Winged liner promises the lifted eye of old Hollywood. The classic flick was drawn on young lids that were smooth and taut, so the line could travel straight out from the lash line and hold its shape. On a mature lid, the outer corner has usually turned slightly down and a soft hood of skin has settled over the crease. A wing drawn straight out now follows the corner's descent, and a wing angled even slightly downward doubles it. The formula makes it worse. Long-wear liquid liners stay put through denatured alcohol and film formers, ingredients that flash dry into a rigid, plastic-like layer. Rigid lines do not bend with a lid that blinks thousands of times a day. Within an hour, the wing begins to crack, and by the end of the day, it has printed a faint gray copy of itself onto the hood above, a stamp that lands exactly where the skin already folds. The corrected wing has a target. Aim it at the tail of the brow, the raised tail from the previous step. Hold the handle of a thin makeup brush against the face, running from the edge of the nostril past the outer corner of the eye, and where the handle crosses the brow is the angle the wing should climb. Keep it short. A 1/4 inch of lifted line does more work than a full inch of straight one. And trade the rigid liquid for a soft pencil or a dark shadow pressed on with an angled brush, then smudge the top edge upward so the line has no hard lower border for the eye to follow down. The wing stops being a stripe and becomes a small arrow pointing at the temple. Before the next placement, one small pause. This channel is Aging Queens, and the work here is exactly this kind of breakdown, taking apart what a formula or a technique actually does on mature skin, so a purchase stops being a guess. If that kind of explanation is useful to you, subscribing is how you keep receiving it. More brand breakdowns are on the way. The outer corner of the eye, where that wing just climbed, is also where the next correction begins. Trick number 5. Concealer flicked upward at the outer corners of the eyes and mouth. Concealer's promise is erasure, and the standard method applies it as a generous half moon under the entire eye. That approach was designed for dark circles on smooth, well-padded under eyes. On skin past 45, the under eye carries fine crepe texture and a hollow that deepens toward the outer corner, and the corner itself holds a small downward crease where decades of smiling have folded the skin. Blanket a high coverage formula across all of that, and the pigment has nowhere flexible to sit. Full coverage concealers carry heavy pigment loads suspended in dimethicone and film formers, a combination engineered to lock in place, and locked product cannot move with a face that moves. Within the first hour, it has migrated into every fine line and gathered in the outer crease as a pale, crumbly ridge. By midday, the corner the concealer was meant to brighten has been outlined instead. The corrected application is smaller, thinner, and directional. Use a lightweight concealer, one shade brighter than the skin, never chalk white. Draw a short flick from the outer corner of the eye, angled up toward the tail of the brow. Then tap it flat with the warmth of a ring finger until it disappears. Repeat the same tiny flick at each corner of the mouth, angled toward the earlobe, over the small shadow where the lips turn down. In plain terms, each flick paints a few grains of light onto the 2 corners the eye checks first, when deciding whether a face looks tired. The whole correction uses less product than one old-style half moon, and it holds through the afternoon because there is almost nothing there to crack. With the corners cleared, the face needs somewhere for the recovered light to go. Trick number 6. Highlight on the high points only. Highlighter promises glow, and for years the fashion was to apply it generously, down the nose, across the front of the cheeks, above the lip. The mechanism it exploits is simple and honest. The eye travels to the brightest point of a face before it processes anything else, but that mechanism does not care where the bright point sits. Shimmer placed low on the cheek pulls the gaze low, and the sparkle itself carries a cost on mature skin, because traditional highlighters get their flash from large-cut mica and glitter particles, and large reflective flakes sit on top of texture and magnify it, turning every pore and fine line into a lit surface. By midday, under office lighting, a heavy highlight on a 55-year-old cheek stops reading as glow and starts reading as a spotlight on texture. The corrected version uses a finely milled satin highlight, the kind built on small particle mica that gives a sheen rather than a sparkle, and rations it to the points that sit naturally high on the bone. The top of the cheekbone, where the blush diagonal ends, the brow bone just beneath that raised tail. A small touch at the inner corner of the eye, angled slightly up. Nothing on the nose, nothing on the front of the cheek, nothing near the smile lines. Placed this way, the brightest points of the face form a line that runs upward and outward, and the eye follows that line every time it returns. Makeup artists describe this as parking the light, where the face should appear to hang from. There is one shadow no highlight placement can outshine, and it sits at the center of the face. Trick number 7. Soften nasolabial shadows. The fold that runs from the nostril to the corner of the mouth is the line women report fighting hardest, and the instinct is to bury it under coverage. Full coverage foundation promises exactly that, a smooth, uniform surface. The mechanism betrays the promise. That fold reads dark, mainly because it sits in shade, a crease shadowed by the softened cheek above it, and heavy foundation cannot lighten a shadow. It can only add a layer of pigment that gravity and movement press into the crease. Film formers in longwear bases lock that pigment down once it settles, and many foundation pigments oxidize as the day goes on, darkening half a shade in the very spot where product has pooled. The result, by the end of the day, is a fold that has been traced back on in a color deeper than the morning skin. The product has redrawn the exact line it was bought to hide. The corrected approach thins the base and brightens the shadow. Over the fold itself, wear the sheerest workable layer of foundation, pressed in with fingers or a damp sponge rather than dragged. Then take a small brush loaded with a liquid concealer a single shade lighter than the skin, and lay a fine line only into the deepest part of the crease, blending it upward onto the cheek, never down toward the chin. Brightening a shadow tells the eye the crease is shallower than it is. Dermatologists make a version of the same point about clinical photography, that changing the light on a fold changes its apparent depth more than changing the skin does. This step borrows that principle with one brushstroke. Follow that fold past the corner of the mouth and it dissolves into the soft shadow along the jaw, where the next habit does quiet damage. Trick number 8. Quieting the jowl shadow instead of contouring the jawline. Jaw contouring promises a sharper profile. Tutorials show bronzer swept along the whole jawbone and under the chin, and on a firm young jaw that can photograph as definition. On a mature jaw, the situation is different, because a soft pouch of descended cheek now interrupts the jawline on each side, and that pouch already casts its own small shadow. Sweep a matte bronzer along the jaw, and the product lands in and around that real shadow. The eye cannot separate pigment from shade. It simply sums the darkness and reports a heavier lower face. There is also a practical wear problem reviewers mention constantly, which is that powder along the jaw transfers onto collars and scarves by midday, leaving the color patchy in exactly the zone where patchiness reads as sag. The correction removes darkness from the front of the jaw entirely. If shading is used at all, it stays tucked under the back corner of the jaw near the ear, blended upward, where it recedes without touching the jowl. Then the jowl shadow itself gets the nasolabial treatment, a small amount of light diffusing concealer pressed just into the crease above the pouch and blended up toward the cheek. Nothing is carved. The goal is quieter in every sense, lowering the contrast of that one shadow until the eye stops snagging on it. Makeup artists who prepare mature clients for television sum up the lower face rule in 3 words: add no shadows. That leaves one downward line still on the map, and it sits directly under the eye. Trick number 9, minimal lower lash darkness. Lining the lower waterline and coating the bottom lashes was standard practice through the 80s and 90s, and the promise was a bigger, more defined eye. On a young eye with tight skin, a full dark ring can work as a frame. On an eye past 45, the lower lid already carries natural shading, from thinner skin, from the small hollow beneath it, from the descending outer corner. A dark pencil under the eye stacks painted darkness on top of all of it, and the eye reads the total as one deep shadow pulling downward, which makes the whole eye sit lower in the face. The formula adds movement to the problem. Kohl and cream liners glide because they are built on soft waxes and emollients, but soft formulas travel. The eye's own tear film and any emollient skincare underneath carry the pigment steadily south. So by 3 in the afternoon, the liner has feathered into the fine lines below the lashes and drawn them in gray. The correction is mostly subtraction. Leave the waterline bare, which also makes the white of the eye look clearer by contrast. Skip mascara on the lower lashes, or use one light pass of brown at the outer third only. If the eye still wants definition, press a soft matte brown shadow into the roots of the outer lower lashes and smudge it upward, into the lash line rather than below it. All the darkness the eye can carry belongs above it, on the upper lashes and the lifted wing, where depth reads as depth instead of descent. You would expect the back of a kohl pencil to mention any of this. It does not. 9 placements have now redrawn the map. The last trick concerns the canvas every one of them sits on, and it is the subject this channel returns to more than any other. Trick number 10. Satin. Light reflecting texture instead of flat matte. Matte finishes promise sophistication and control. The category, matte foundations, mattifying primers, setting powders, was engineered in an era of oily young skin and a fear of shine, and the mechanism is absorption. Talc, silica, and kaolin clay soak up oil on contact. On skin over 50, the equation flips. Oil production falls sharply after menopause, and the barrier lets moisture escape faster through a process dermatologists call transepidermal water loss, water leaving through the skin itself. Point an absorbent formula at skin already running a deficit, and it pulls from reserves that do not exist. Within an hour, the surface starts to feel tight. By the end of the day, a fully matte face on dry skin reads flat, gray, and older than it looked bare, because a matte surface returns no light, and a face that returns no light gives the eye nothing but its shadows to read. Every fold covered in tricks 1 through 9 shows at maximum contrast on a matte canvas. Satin is the correction, and satin describes a mechanism rather than a mood. Satin and demi-matte formulas swap the heaviest absorbents for spherical silica and finely milled mica, round particles that bounce light softly in many directions instead of trapping it. Soft, scattered reflection blurs the border of every shadow it touches, which means the nasolabial fold, the jowl shadow, and the under eye all drop in contrast at once, across the whole face, without a single targeted correction. Choose bases described as satin, natural finish, or radiant. Set only the center of the face lightly with a fine, loose powder and leave the perimeter free to reflect. Reviewers over 40 describe the change in the same words again and again. The skin looks alive. Step back from the 10 tricks and one pattern is holding them together. Every correction moved a line, a shadow, or a point of light onto an upward angle. Blush on a diagonal, brows and wings ending high, brightness parked on top of the bone, painted shadows dissolved or blended toward the temples. And every correction that touched a formula traded rigidity for flexibility and coverage, for light, cream over powder, satin over matte, a sheer flick of brightness over a heavy blanket of pigment. Those are the same 2 moves this channel finds underneath nearly every product that fails on mature skin. Aging pulls the face's map downward and dries the surface it is drawn on. But the industry spent decades selling heavy pigment and aggressive mattifiers built for the opposite problem. A face over 45 needs less product than the old routines demanded, placed at better angles, in textures that let light in. There is a simple test for tomorrow morning. When the makeup is finished, step to arm's length from the bathroom mirror and find every visible line the products have made. If each one points toward the temples, the work is done. Aging Queens makes these videos for one reason, so that women over 45 can see the mechanism behind a product before spending money on it. Whether that mechanism is a mattifying powder or a downward stroke of blush. Subscribing keeps that work coming, and several new brand breakdowns are already in progress. Now, a question for the comments. Of the old techniques covered today, which one were you taught first, and who taught it to you? The answers tend to show exactly how far back the downward habits go.